Last week, in response to the tragic shooting of two members of the West Virginia National Guard in Washington, D.C., President Trump announced that he was immediately halting the processing of immigrants coming to the United States from what he called third world countries. He did this because the person who shot those two National Guard members, one of whom, Sarah Beckstrom, died on Thanksgiving, is a refugee from Afghanistan. In addition to the announced immigration stoppage, Trump posted several messages on his Truth Social website where he fearmongered and scapegoated Afghans, blamed his predecessor Joe Biden for allowing dangerous people into the country, and launched the latest in a career-long series of bigoted complaints against immigration in general, saying, in part, quote, "The official United States foreign population stands at 53 million people, most of which are on welfare, from failed nations, or from prisons, mental institutions, gangs, or drug cartels. They and their children are supported through massive payments from patriotic American citizens who, because of their beautiful hearts, do not want to openly complain or cause trouble in any way, shape, or form." And then he goes on and actually gets worse from there. This is typical Trump rhetoric, us versus them, pushing the racist and inaccurate narrative that immigrants are draining resources from real Americans. And I love the characterization of Americans who don't like what's happening but don't complain about it because of their beautiful hearts. Yeah. Because that's one thing I know about my fellow Americans who think they're being taken advantage of by immigrants. They never say a word about it. Whenever an immigrant or a refugee or a Muslim or a follower of some other religion that is a minority here in the US, or a trans person, or really anyone who is a member of a minority or an out group does something bad, it always throws suspicion on that entire group. Now, because one person from Afghanistan committed this terrible crime for reasons we don't even know yet as of the writing of this video, everyone who was resettled here from Afghanistan will be punished by our raging asshole president. It's unacceptable whenever anyone uses the crime of an individual to scapegoat an entire group, but it's especially grotesque in this case, since the group Trump is scapegoating is not merely people from Afghanistan, but Afghans who assisted the U.S. military during the war in Afghanistan. These are people who put their lives and the lives of their families at risk to cross the Taliban and help our side during that conflict. And the reason they and their families came here and were welcomed here is because if they had stayed in Afghanistan, they could have been killed by the Taliban in retaliation for their actions during the war. These aren't ordinary refugees. We owe them. Not that Trump gives a shit. We've seen this story play out before, sadly, many times before Trump was president, though he has certainly embraced it during his time in office, practically making it his signature policy. When someone who can be defined as not one of us is the suspect, then everyone like them is also suspected. But when the suspect is a white person, a cis-hetero person, a natural-born, by-God American person, well, I don't know about you fellow cis-het white natural-born Americans out there, but I've never felt the glare of accusing eyes or the boot of government agents on my neck because someone like me committed a crime. Just lucky, I guess. Trump also posted a video message about the shooting, and actually mostly the fact that the shooting was perpetrated by an immigrant, which he took as an opportunity to rant about how terrible it is that there are so many immigrants here from non-white countries, because he takes pretty much everything as an opportunity to rant about that. I'll spare you most of what he had to say, but I did want to play you this bit.
We're not going to put up with these kind of assaults on law and order by people who shouldn't even be in our country. We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden, and we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them.
Pretty bleak stuff. But it's that last sentence that I'm really interested in. I included the rest for a bit of context, for all the good that does with this guy. The more he says, the less he says. If they can't love our country, we don't want them, said Trump. And I heard him say that, and I thought, what does he mean by love our country? And I figured that when he talks about love of country, Trump means love of him, because that's all he cares about anyway. He likes people who like him, and he hates people who hate him, or who he thinks hate him, or who he thinks don't like him enough, or who he thinks are a drag on him or a threat to him. And that's really all there is to him. I just explained Donald Trump. You're welcome, future historians trying to figure out what the hell happened during this period of American history. It was pretty much that. But then I started to think about that question beyond Trump himself. What do Republicans, more broadly, what do conservatives actually love about the United States of America? When I say conservatives, I'm talking about in the general public, ordinary people, private citizens, voters, not politicians. When politicians talk about love of country, they're making a sales pitch. But what about the people they're pitching to? Conservative Americans seem to regard love of country as a very important thing. It's a core value to many of them, and appeals to patriotism from politicians can be very effective at winning support from conservatives or motivating conservatives to take action. What is it they love about America, though? Really, it's not the people. Conservatives, in general, as a group, seem attached to some of the American people, but downright hostile to others, and that hostility isn't based on any preferences I would call defensible. They don't like immigrants and refugees, even ones who arrive legally and go through the whole official process. Some conservatives like to say they have no problems with immigrants who come here that way, the right way, they call it, but, and this is just me, a lot of the time, I don't really believe them. What is a country if not its people? And a country isn't just some of its people, it's all of its people. That's the country. That's the nation. You can't say you love your country when you despise whole swaths of its people for arbitrary and prejudiced reasons. But don't people like you despise conservatives, Steve? No, hypothetical dipshit, we don't. Or I don't, at least. I'll just speak for myself. The conservatives I despise for very specific reasons. And as for the rest of you, I don't despise you. I just wish you weren't such a drag and would stop fucking things up for the rest of us. One of the most beautiful things about this profoundly flawed country of ours is how that united in United States has come to mean so many different things. We're united by geography because we live on the same continent, mostly. Hello, Alaska, way up there in the corner. Hello, Hawaii, way out there in the ocean. Hello, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Northern Mariana Islands. We're united politically by the U.S. Constitution and the federal government. We're united culturally by food and holidays and sports and pop culture. We're united by all sorts of things, but we're also united because, though we are very different from one another, we are one country. E pluribus unum, the traditional and rightful motto of the United States. From many, one. From many places of origin, from many races and ethnicities, from many religions, from many communities and traditions, from many intersecting and crisscrossing and beautifully blending identities. We are one. Conservatives, in general, don't seem to love that about America. They don't seem to love our history either. They get awfully mad when people try to teach students certain parts of it, don't they? Trump himself has complained frequently, bitterly, and publicly about teachers who are supposedly indoctrinating impressionable young children to hate America by teaching the history of slavery and racial discrimination and genocide of indigenous people. It's not meant for children to learn to hate America, so they say. It's meant for children to learn about why America is great. Is that what a great nation does? Hides from its own history? Rewrites its story to leave out all the ugly and embarrassing parts so we can all just pretend they never happened? Nobody who would want something like that can honestly say they love history. You know who strikes me as someone who loves history? Ken Burns. That guy seems endlessly fascinated by American history, and he has made a career out of that fascination, directing or co-directing so many brilliant documentaries about people and events from American history. The Civil War, World War II, the Vietnam War, the history of baseball, the history of jazz and country music, the invention of the radio, the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, the lives of Thomas Jefferson, Muhammad Ali, Mark Twain, Benjamin Franklin, Jack Johnson, and the Roosevelt family, and that's not even close to all of it. Ken Burns' newest documentary, which he co-directed with Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt, is about the American Revolution. And guess who hates it? Conservatives. I'm sure they're not the only ones, and I'm sure it's not all of them, but it's more than a few of them at least, and it's for pretty much the reasons you would guess. For example, here's what National Review editor-in-chief, syndicated columnist, and professional guy who is wrong about things Rich Lowry says about Burns' American Revolution in a recent column. Quote, "Few documentary films have the natural authority of a Ken Burns production. That makes it especially outrageous that Burns feeds the viewers of his new epic documentary, The American Revolution, a childish canard right at the outset. Burns implies that the Iroquois Confederacy, a union of 6 Indian tribes or nations in New York State, crucially influenced the founding of the United States. This is a nice fairy tale, but has no connection to reality. And Burns and his colleagues, who worked on the documentary for about a decade, had time to verify this claim." Here's the problem. Even if you agree with Lowry that it would be a childish canard to argue that the Iroquois Confederacy influenced the founding of the United States, the film doesn't argue that. The film doesn't imply that. The film is not, as Lowry also accuses, carefully constructed to be misleading without being flagrantly false on this point. Anyone who actually watched Ken Burns' American Revolution, and I mean watched and paid attention instead of sitting there remote in hand ready to pause and make a note whenever anything woke happened, would know that while the film does acknowledge the Iroquois Confederacy and devotes a good deal of its running time to describing the many complex ways Native Americans participated in and interacted with the American Revolution, it does not imply that the Iroquois Confederacy influenced, much less crucially influenced, the founding of the United States. I think Rich Lowry realizes this, at least on some level, because nowhere in his column is he able to demonstrate that the film contains this implication. Lowry writes, "It is certainly true that the Iroquois had forged an enduring confederacy, but this was hardly a unique contribution to political practice. The film doesn't argue or imply that it was unique, merely that it existed prior to, and, for a time, concurrent with, European colonization of North America." Lowry writes, "The film suggests a connection between a statement made by the Iroquois leader Conisatego recommending a union on the one hand and Benjamin Franklin on the other." Again, no, it doesn't. What the film does is establish that the Iroquois and other groups of indigenous people were not the primitive, lawless savages they are still frequently depicted as, that they had their own organized, sophisticated societies, and that they were doing okay before the white people got here. And I guess Lowry thinks it's unacceptably woke and deceptively suggestive to even mention that? Conservatives like Rich Lowry and Donald Trump, though unlike Lowry, his conservatism is more a result of his unhinged narcissism, bigotry, and greed than it is a result of a conscious ideological commitment to the values of narcissism, bigotry, and greed, only love the bits of American history that serve their narrative, that speak to their ideas of American exceptionalism and the greatness of the United States. They love American history the way they think it ought to have been. That, I think, is the answer to my question. What do conservatives love about America? They love some of the people, the ones they think ought to be here, the ones like them, or who are sufficiently deferential to the ones like them. They love some of the history, the bits they can boast about, the bits that don't challenge them or make them uncomfortable or contradict the story they like to tell themselves, because that story they like to tell themselves, that's what they actually love about America. They love the America in their heads, the concept of the country that they carry around with them and project onto everything and everyone, the imaginary standard by which they judge the real world. It's based on the real America, but removed from it, warped and distorted by ignorance and prejudice, and weighted heavily toward the memories of how the world was when they were children, or how their parents or grandparents told them things used to be. And look, we all do this, to one degree or another. We're all susceptible to nostalgia, to wishful thinking, to imposing our notions of how things should be on how things are in ways that are not rational or constructive, in ways that don't serve progress. Some of us just make more of an effort to recognize it for what it is and to guard against it. You can't truly love America or any country or anyone or anything unless you can acknowledge who or what they truly are. That doesn't mean loving every single thing about it, and it certainly doesn't mean accepting every single thing about it. It means looking at it with clear eyes, seeing the good, seeing the bad, seeing the potential, and caring enough to try and make things better. If that's not the way you love your country, then you're not actually loving it. You're fantasizing about it. It's not patriotism, it's masturbation. And unless you have prior consent, it's really not cool to do that in front of other people. Put it away.